All right, so on the calipers, before I wanted to throw them in the car, I wanted to paint them. This is a really kind of ghetto way of doing it, but it works. I'm not too worried about dirt or anything getting on them because they're not gonna be like super professional or anything like that. So this will be fine. I just got bungee cords, attached them to the roof up there. Hooked them up, hooked them to one of the bolts in the caliper, and I made sure I taped off the ends of them. Here, I'll show you this one because I haven't actually done yet. Got that part taped off. You got the pistons all taped off, and the bolts in the back all taped off. I did leave this plug in there for the actual brake line. And then, so what I did on these, as you can see, I just did my first coat of primer on this one. So this is just one coat of light primer after scuffing it up and cleaning it all off with brake cleaner, alcohol, making sure it's all nice and good. And then this one, I had 2 coats of primer, 3.5 coats of red caliper paint, which I actually have right here is exactly what I used. The primer I used, if I can find it, that's the clear I used. Primer, I don't know where that's at. Oh, it's over here. So this is the primer I used. Did have a few issues with this. If you can see right there, it kept dripping off of there. So I kind of just left it as it is. I have the same thing right in here, but I'm not too worried about it. Again, once it's on the car, you really won't be able to see it that much unless you look really close to it. So I'm not too worried about that. But I've got this one on its second coat of clear. I'll probably give it 3 coats of clear coat and let it sit and hang up in here for probably about until next Saturday. It's Saturday right now, so until next Saturday. It's about like a week. So I'll let it sit here let it kind of cure and get, dust all over it. So I'm not too worried about that. So we took off the spacer that I already had on here, which if you do this in your car, you're going to need a spacer. I use the hub centric. I think these are Titan spacers. I've had it on for about 2 years. I have no issues. Took off the rotor, took off the caliper, and took it up back there. Now the hub's got to come off. So there's 4 13mm bolts on the back of here. Onto the spindle, you will need a 1/2 inch and a 9/16 drill bit to drill out the mounting holes. You're going to want to start out with your 1/2 inch and then move up to the 9/16. You'll need this in order to clear the mounting holes for the new bolts. The key to drilling them out is to put very light pressure on them as you're drilling out the hole. If you put too much pressure, the drill will get caught and stuck in there. It is also crucial to make sure you're drilling at a straight angle, not crooked and not sideways. If you do that, it might make it a little bit of an issue for the bolts to actually go in there once you try to mount the caliper up. The trick to getting this clip out of here is when you want to put the pick on the back of the clip on each side, top and bottom, like how I have it shown right now. Get a hammer on there and lightly tap it to push it away from the brake line. Once you get it away from the brake line, it'll pop free just like that. Once you get that clip out, all you gotta do is pull that brake line towards the outer side of the car and it'll pop out of the clip, as you can see right there, and then you have full access to get a line wrench or regular wrench on that brake line to break it loose.
I prefer to use a line wrench because it has more security when you try to loosen it as opposed to a regular box end wrench. Before that clip comes off, you might want to put it back on there if you've already taken it off. I leave it on there because when you try to loosen the brake line, it'll flex way too much if there's nothing securing that brake line to that. So I keep that clip on there just for that reason. And then also, as you're trying to bend it down, it might try to bend the bracket right there with it. So you might want to use a caliper or something to support it as you're trying to break the brake line loose.
Alright, I got my hoses from Core 3, and they're actually pretty well made lines. So what I had was, I had this bracket we took it out of. I had the line, and as you can see back here, I threaded the old brake line onto there. Now the only question I have is there's still threads exposed, but I did thread this thing in a lot of the way to this actual brake line, and it went in easy, didn't give me any troubles. So I'm just assuming that it's going to be a good seal in there, but I'm going to double check before I actually drive the car. Like I said, there's no brake fluid leaking back out of there. There is brake fluid down here, which I have a rag kind of collecting. And so this hardware gave you, well, it gave you some of these, which you could use to replace the actual bracket here. But for me, that bracket worked with the new locking clips they gave me. So I just literally just put this in like that, as you can see, and it fit pretty well. Didn't have any issues there. And it's snug. The only thing that's bad with it is I had to tighten down the bolt right here because the whole bracket itself is kind of loose. But other than that, there's not an issue with it.
When reinstalling the wheel hubs, you want to do 63 foot-pounds with a blue Loctite on the thread to make sure it doesn't back itself out.
One thing to notice, on the back of this caliper, the bolt right here, it goes out too much and will hit the back of the rotor. So I bought spacers, washers actually, add spacer to hopefully clear that issue. But yeah, when you put this on, you want to double check. Sometimes you might not have that issue, but I did. On the back of this spindle, there's a lip right here. So if you try to put washers on the bolt itself, it's not going to clear. The washers get caught on this lip, and it will not allow you to put a spacer or a washer or anything in there. So what I did, I've seen people cut them. What I did was I just took the spacer and grinded down the side of it. So if you put it on there, it about matches exactly where you need to go on there with no issues, versus if you try to put this one on there, it's not going to clear. It's cutting too much on the sides. So what I did is you have to make those cuts on those washers on the top and the bottom bolt, but in my experience you only need one. You only need one washer on each side. You don't want to put too many. You put too many, might mess up with how the clearances and the brake pads are. So I just put one on the back there, one on the back of the bottom. As you can see now, they might be barely protruding out of the actual caliper, but they're not even close to the rotor. So you have more than enough clearance for that. Alright, on these, the brake pads, they went in like that. As you can see, make sure you put brake lube on the back of the pads for the pistons. And then at the hardware kit, what we want to do is put this pin through first. So you put it through the back, and then you don't put it all the way through, put it like halfway through so you can hook this thing, the hardware kit, and then slide it through the rest of the way. Make sure you put a little bit of grease on the pin itself too. Then at the bottom, put it halfway through again on the back. Make sure you bend this part down to hook into it, and then slide it through, and it come out this hole. Now they won't come out all the way like this is, so what you have to do is you have to get a hammer on the back of them and just tap them until they come out and come into like flush like this, because when you put them in there in the first place, they'll be sitting kind of far back in there. So once they kind of protrude from here, you know they'll be pretty good and set to go. So for the brake lines themselves, this one, the kit that I got, since I got new brake lines, came with banjo bolts and copper washers. So what you want to do is you want to put one of the washers on before you put the bolt on there, and then one of them in front of the actual hose, so you kind of have washers on both ends of that hose. Another warning is to minimize any leakage of brake fluid anywhere. If you painted the calipers, if you painted any other parts while you were in there, and brake fluid gets on it, it'll eat through it very, very quickly. So just make sure if you spilled any brake fluid anywhere, make sure to clean it up as soon as you possibly can before it has a chance to eat any of the paint on the calipers or any parts you painted. As you can see, the wheel fits perfectly fine, no rubbing, no hitting anything on the caliper. However, I did have to run Titan hub-centric spacers, about 25 millimeters if I believe. It's been a few years since I bought them, but I believe they were 25 millimeter spacers for the fronts and the rears I run, just because I wanted that offset look without having to buy the wheels for it. But as you can see, it clears the fronts no problem, the sides no problem, on a 17-inch wheel, OEM wheel. Has no issues with clearance wise as long as you run that spacer in there. Before you go ahead and drive the car, make sure you bleed out the brakes from rear right, rear left, front right, front left. Verify no leakage of any of the lines, and once that's good to go, there's no more air in it, you should be all good to go.